Can you remember, how did it affect your schooling?
Well, with schooling, the school I went to was, I lived about 100 yards off that school, so very near to home. It affected the school in the fact that at certain times, when air raids did go off in daytime, that again, all the school, we had shelters all built round the school perimeter, and we're better than being in classroom, being in a shelter, like, you know, I mean, you were away, you got out of classroom, or it was some teacher you didn't like, you'd be rather sat in shelter. And the other thing I remember about school is, in school playground, they used to bring these like caravans, and you used to have to go with your parents and put a gas mask on and go into these caravans, and they'd have some chemical that they set off like a candle, and if your gas masks were leaking, it made your eyes run. It was like tear gas. So every so often everybody had to go to that school in that area, and they had to put the gas mask on and have it tested. So that's another thing they had at school. But the only thing where it affected at school is that because of the area we lived in, that the air raid sirens, you know, were always going off, because they suspected certain enemy aircraft had come over to take films and pictures of what they wanted to do. And of course, they come from the Humber, and they followed the rivers and canals right through up into South Yorkshire. So on a moonlit night, I mean, I remember my dad used to say, oh, it's a nice night for bombing, because if it were moonlit, they always feared, they'd follow that Humber all the way up the valley, the Sheffield, Rotherham, Doncaster Valley, and all the steelworks were in that valley. But if to this day, and we've discussed it many a time, they never ever landed a bomb on any of that steelworks.
Father in the services?
My dad was called up, but he failed all his medical on a heart condition he had, and I think he did about 9 weeks, and then we got to know that they were, I think it was 1942 he were called up, and he were invalided out. They found out he'd got an heart condition that had been caused by, he'd had some when he was a youngster, which had caused that heart condition, and of course they discharged him. But at the same time he were in a job in steelworks that, like a lot of them, got exempt, and miners and things like that, because we lived in a huge mining area. It was covered in mines and steelworks where we come from, and of course miners were exempt from being in. But I had an uncle who went all the way through war. He was in the first people to go into France, and he come through Dunkirk, and then finished up going all through the Desert Campaign and through Italy into Europe. But he never got a scratch. So he had some stories to tell, of course, because he were in the army right throughout from, I think he said 1939 right till 45, 46.
Before the war you had a particular style of life. Did that change after the war, or did you just sort of go back to normal?
Well, I'll tell you a little story that in 1939, as the war were breaking out in September, we were on holiday at Cleethorpes, and it was somewhat unusual because we were going for a week and we came back on a Wednesday, and my dad had said, like, they'd been told they'd got to go back, that anybody on holiday had got to get a train back, before a certain date, that was the following weekend, because the trains were going to be requisitioned for troop movements. And the funny thing about it, a year after war finished, my dad took us back to Cleethorpes for an holiday. But we had a full holiday when we went back in 1946, because Cleethorpes were the nearest place to us, and everybody went to Cleethorpes for a holiday, and they knew the local landladies. I mean, the local landlady we went to, I always remember her name was Mrs. Luke, and my grandma had been to see, had been on holiday there in early 1930s, so it was a place where people in South Yorkshire went to, Cleethorpes. And as soon as the war was over, 1946, 1946 to 47 sometime then, we were back in Cleethorpes for a week's holiday. So the thing the biggest thing after war as a kid was that blackouts come down. We had no blackouts, and street lamps were on, and what vehicles there were knocking about in them days had headlights or lights on, and you walk down the street and the lights were on in people's houses, because I lived on a main road that went into Rotherham. But before that, everything was black out. At night time were completely dark, bar for little lights they had on these lamps, and cars with special visors on the lamps. Everything was blacked out. But as soon as the war was over, it was like being in Disneyland, because street lights were on, which we'd never seen. We weren't old enough to remember, because they were put out straight away as the war began, and all of a sudden everything was lit up. People's homes were lit up. You were able to go out at night and things like that, and without struggling without lights. And eventually one or two happened to come amongst to have an orange or a banana or something like that, or a lemon that you'd only seen on photographs or what people had talked about, and things did become easier. But